All right. Hey, thanks everyone for coming. I know you all have other places that you could be, so we appreciate you spending your time with us. I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and then I'll hand it over to tonight's speaker. My name is Eric Frank. I'm the head of admissions at Promotable. Promotable, we are a workforce accelerator that empowers and prepares professionals for high-growth careers in the digital economy with courses in data analytics, Python programming, and product management. We do this through events like tonight's, where we invite practitioners from industry-leading companies. In addition, we host a series of workshops and classes. All of our classes are designed for working professionals, taught by practitioners like tonight's speaker, and only 5 hours per week. We have a bunch of upcoming classes starting next month, in the beginning of next month of July, and then moving into August. So definitely check out our website and keep abreast of what's going on there. And then the data analytics course that we host, if you want to level up your data skills, data analytics is the spot for you. The class is designed for analyst managers and anyone else who wants to level up their data skills. You don't need to have a data analytics or coding background to join the course. It's a hands-on course, and you'll learn the skills you need to turn your data into insights that solve business problems. You'll learn to confidently navigate and manipulate large data sets, use technologies like SQL and Tableau to visualize and communicate your insights to stakeholders with powerful dashboards. It's 5 hours a week, and it is 8 weeks. We also have a capsulated Tableau course that's coming up really soon, so definitely look out for that. And then we have a Python course coming up as well. So keep in line with that, and definitely check us out. In terms of how to follow us and keep attention with us, definitely check out our social. So our Slack community has over 8,000 members. You'll receive an invitation to our Slack community after this, where you can connect with other business and tech professionals, share resumes, best practices, and more. Definitely check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, the usuals. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, obviously, our YouTube page is a good spot to check past events and watch some more videos, so subscribe to us on there as well. Again, thanks for joining this evening. We got a quick video, and then we'll let the speaker start.
Analytics play a crucial part in today's business world. People that have data skills have the best chance of career success. At Promotable, we help professionals take their careers to the next level. From analytics basics to more advanced tools such as SQL, Tableau, and Python. Promotable utilizes industry experts who focus on teaching in-demand skills that empower career opportunities, providing flexible class schedules to working professionals with the affordable training they need. Invest in your career and become promotable. Promotable, data-driven career development. www.promotable.io.
Awesome. So tonight is the Data Analytics Toolkit, Top Tools and Best Practices for Analysts and Leaders, hosted by Abe. He is an analytics lead at Sports Radar. So definitely check that out, and we will get going. So I'll hand it over to Abe, and we'll get moving on here.
All right, everybody. Hope everyone's doing okay. It's actually pretty nice and sunny here in Chicago, so hopefully everyone is hunkering down wherever they happen to be at this point in time. I know it's obviously been a very turbulent 2020 for everyone, but let me get into this slide here and talk to you about a little bit of the things that I've kind of encountered throughout my career in data analytics. All right, so as Eric mentioned, my name is Abraham Jaraseski. I'm a data analyst at Sport Radar. I sort of head up the analytics side of our research team. We do research for Fox Sports, Fox Regional Sports, and many other industry leaders in the broadcast space. As I mentioned there, and you can also email me if you'd like, or hit me up on LinkedIn if you have any further questions after this. But I guess my main two things here are I use SQL and Tableau in conjunction with each other to build automated reports. Now, those automated reports will grab data from our SQL databases, and that allows us to create both internal and external reports for all this kind of different stuff that we talk about. Basically, if you think about anytime you're watching a broadcast, right, the main emphasis will be on what's going on the field. Like, say, for example, if you're watching a football game, right, you will often have the quarterback dropping back, and then the cameras will always follow the ball, right? And then there's sort of a gap, right, between basically when the ball is hiked, or excuse me, the last play ends and the ball is hiked. Now, for football, right, that might only be If it's a very fast-paced team, it might be 5 seconds. If it's longer, it might be up to 30 seconds. Obviously, with baseball, for example, there's a lot more time between pitches to be able to get into stuff. So you'll start seeing the sort of implementation of these statistics. And so basically, as I mentioned here, we're creating both reports for our external clients. So that might be people in the actual stadium on the ground, as well as for our own personal needs, because in addition to those people that are at the stadium and in the television trucks outside the stadium, sort of doing that, getting that information and typing up the graphics to throw them on air, we are also sort of supporting them using instant messaging and a variety of other tools to also give them information, right? So for example, Drew Brees broke a lot of passing records recently, right? So that's constantly something that they're being tracked because they want to have, that graphic, to populate on the television and to let them know that Drew Brees has just set an NFL record, which is obviously a very important part of that. So that's kind of where the Tableau side comes in. It's sort of a conjunction of data visualization and also just sort of data mining in terms of coming up with interesting things. And as you can imagine, if our databases are being queried using SQL, we're going to not only use those SQL queries to power some of our Tableau reports, but we will also use those in terms of just kind of basically what we would call a custom query to manipulate the data in such a way that it might be sort of a one-time situation, but we still need to sort of join a bunch of tables. Maybe it's a statistics table with a biographical table, et cetera. And we're not only just doing that to support some of these broadcasts, but we're also doing that to make sure our tables are up to date. Depending on how big of a sports fan you are, you might know that sort of sometimes a football game might be played on Sunday, and then there might actually be a stat correction in the middle of the week. So for example, there are times when sometimes a play can be recorded as a run and it's actually a pass, and that kind of gets changed. And we'll use those SQL queries basically as a way to QC the database and make sure that we have everything correct, because again, we need all that data to be 100% matching all other sources and whatnot. So accuracy is super important in this industry. Quick side note, I sort of got started in this with Tableau. That was kind of that was like my first, obviously it's not really a programming language. That was kind of my first introduction to data analyzation, was, using Tableau. And if anyone has used it, you realize very quickly how powerful it is and how many great visualizations you can make without having a ton of technical skill. So I think it's a very good sort of starting one, because again, as long as you're relatively computer literate, you can still use Tableau. And as long as you have sort of a rough understanding of data structures, you don't even need to necessarily be an incredible coder to use it. That way you can able to build really powerful dashboards that, for example, if you were to use an R and Python, you have to be, a very strong programmer to be able to pull that kind of stuff off. So Tableau is something that, honestly, if you're fairly computer savvy and you're well of your data, you can learn how to do very basic Tableau things within a day very easily. That's definitely not true with some programming language. But Tableau is definitely one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's something that you find with a lot of these different things, right? As the deeper you get, the more you realize you don't know. And that's why I say it's sort of difficult to master, because there's just so many different situations and there's going to be a unique solving thing for every specific scenario. So you really have to have a wide variety of knowledge in that specific thing to be able to really get the most out of the program. And there are other things that you can use. I know, for example, Power BI has been very popular in the data visualization space because it's a Microsoft product, and a lot of people get it either very cheaply with their Microsoft Office suite. But I would argue that Tableau is a lot more versatile, it is a lot more powerful. But unfortunately for a lot of organizations, that also does mean it's a little more expensive. So that's something to kind of keep your eye on as you're able to kind of do some of these things. Something I've also learned from doing Tableau is you really have to take your audience in mind, right? So I was mentioning earlier that sometimes we'll create dashboards that are meant to be seen by either the broadcasters or a variety of people that are sort of assisting with the broadcast. And other times we're building dashboards just for ourselves, right? And so there's a real difference there in terms of like what your audience is. So for example, for some of the external things, right, you want to sort of think of it as something that you have to kind of put your seal of approval on. You want to have good design. You want to also be readable. A lot of these people are older men and women. And I think as we've sort of interacted with some of the difference in generations can be really key here in terms of like understanding technology and its usefulness and whatnot. So I think that's something that you have to really keep in mind as sort of your target audience. And I think this is becoming ever increasingly important, is what might look good on a desktop might not look good on mobile and vice versa. So it's sort of really taking a step back and saying, how is my person that I'm sort of trying to write this report for, how are they really going to use it? Is it going to be, mostly something that's done on a phone, or is it going to be something that they're going to have their desktop or laptop up? So, just sort of some things to keep in mind as you're building your dashboards. And I know that's something that Tableau is really trying to adapt to as well, because again, we are sort of in an ever increasing mobile environment. So I did want to provide a work example. So right here, I have one for Aaron Rodgers. For those of you who don't know, he's a quarterback in the NFL. And basically what we're giving them here is, so there's sort of a breakdown here of what I would call our sort of more common statistics. And there's at the bottom here where they're more advanced statistics. And I think we've seen as the big data revolution has really overtaken really every industry, starting arguably with sort of Moneyball in baseball, but it's certainly kind of trickled down to everything. And as computers have gotten more powerful, we've really been able to do a lot of different measures and metrics in a lot of different things, not just sports, finance, obviously, real estate, really any industry you can imagine is really trying to grapple with how to use that data effectively and well. And so, for example, in football, I think it's sort of, maybe at about 3 p.m. in the analytics revolution in football. But basically, what you have to think of is, okay, maybe everyone, if you're a sports fan, you know about passing yards and passing touchdowns and stuff, but let's maybe try to quantify them a little bit differently, right? So maybe we can start with some basic splits, how they do in a specific quarter or in a half, or maybe if they're at home or on the road, or also just different specific scenarios, like how far the pass goes, how the quarterback is lined up. And all these things, again, are there sometimes, I would say more on the team side, they look at it to try to get better players and better talent. And on the broadcast side, they really kind of just do it to tell a story, right? So that's where you get with some of your models. And this is where I think it's important to kind of, you really have to understand what you're really trying to demonstrate with some of these things. Some of this stuff can be predictive, and some of it is just sort of, in sports, you would call it kind of trivia, right? Where it's, all right, it's awesome that Aaron Rodgers has 19 touchdowns out of the shotgun, but how much does that actually mean? It might be a cool stat, but does that mean it's necessarily predictive for what he might do next year? So in the broadcast space, the prediction and stuff like that, machine learning is less important, and it's more just about getting the data out there. As I mentioned earlier, we also have to use SQL to really kind of power a lot of these different dashboards. I think it's really powerful to learn SQL because I think it's got a good mix of being a really popular language and one that's also been around for a while. So you have companies that are, still kind of running on Oracle SQL. And I think if anyone has kind of worked for a company before, it's really, once you kind of stick to one technology, you're not going to really change much. So again, it's sort of a situation where like we've already built our databases in X language or with X company. We're not going to just totally revise that database most likely. So, it's going to be something that I think continues to grow, is going to evolve, especially as more people learn it. But I don't think it's, any sort of chic programming language that's going to sort of die out quickly or be sort of in more of a niche industries. I think it's going to be something that's prevalent everywhere. Part of that, again, is because some of the solutions are open source, and also some of them are premium, right? So some people are sort of stuck in their environment and they're sticking to that environment for the whole time. And there are a lot of different types of SQL languages, but the good thing is there's very minimal differences in terms of commands or programming languages. So like my example here was MySQL versus MemSQL. My company actually kind of transitioned between the two, and there were slight differences when you were programming, but nothing that anyone who sort of knew one language didn't quite know about one of the other languages. It wasn't sort of night and day situation there. So again, SQL best practices. I think the best thing, and I think kind of anyone will tell you this, right, is reproducible code. That's something that is really important for anyone, because not only do you need to be able to hand it off to maybe one of your coworkers, but to be frank, also people that might happen to have your job at a different spot. Let's say that you got a promotion within the company and you sort of had to hand off some of your work, or maybe you were trying to enhance your workflows and all those kind of different things. It's just super important, and that's why it leads into my second part about just comment, explain. Because to be honest, even something like in this February, for example, I was out of the country for about 10 days to 2 weeks. And it's kind of surprising once you kind of get out of your routine, how quickly you can kind of, I wouldn't say forget things, but maybe they kind of slip your mind. So the commenting is not just for other people, but also kind of for yourself too, especially if it's a line of code or something like that you haven't really looked at in a while. So it's just really helpful. It's always worth the extra effort. And I think it's everyone's sort of natural inclination to sometimes not do it, but it's just always important, and you always end up getting burned when you don't. So I'll give you a work example here. So you can imagine, if you're a sports fan at all, just how complicated and convoluted some of these data points can be, right? I mean, at this point, because of how simple it is to really quantify all these different things, we have every specific play in every specific sport basically has, I would say, up to maybe 65 data points that are being populated on every specific thing, right? What month, what day of the week, what ballpark or stadium it's played in, what position the player may or not play. And so, for example, when I was talking about some of that stuff where we do things live, right? So this one is, as you can see at the top, a nice little comment there, player stats through team games. And that's a very common thing, again, if you're ever a sports fan at all. It's like we'll see that a lot in baseball, arguably, for any baseball fans out there, right? With this 60-game season. Okay, well, there's not really going to be the single season home run record, but for example, maybe what are the most home runs hit through the first 60 games, right? That will be sort of a common thing that will be a storyline of this whole season. And so you can see how we've used different sort of records and fields to populate some of those different answers, and also really commenting out some of these things. And this makes this code, right? This code can maybe be used to answer upwards of 15 to 20 questions every day. And then you can kind of imagine, again, if you're in finance, if you have the same report that you're running every single quarter, if you're just using comments, there's no real need to sort of rewrite this code every single time. Now, I say all this, obviously technical skills are important. Companies like Promotable are out there to really help you out and really try to guide you along in this process. But I would argue that the most important is communication. And that's something that is going to be true in every industry. And it really kind of starts in the interview, right? You have to sort of be your salesperson for why you need that job, why you need to get your foot in the door, and why they should pick you over sort of, again, with some of these jobs, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. So you need to be able to communicate effectively, both not only how well you do things, but also how important what you are doing actually does matter. And I think that's why I think Tableau can be super powerful, because especially growing up, it was a lot of, I'm just a visual learner, right? I can't just listen in a lecture for an hour and grab the material. I need pictures or diagrams or whatever. So the data visualization can really help with that. If you kind of subscribe to that theory, especially. And then the last one here, just that elevator pitch mentality. Again, I think that maybe gets overused a little bit, but you'll often be in meetings, right, where there will be 25 to 30 people in a meeting, and it's maybe an hour meeting, and you're sort of required to update, and you're not going to have an hour to do that. You might have 5 minutes. And again, that's sort of where it's important to, be concise, be clear, and again, maybe use some data visualization that maybe you learn in a program like Tableau to be able to really get your point across and really display why your recommendation is the correct move for your company. As I kind of mentioned that, obviously I do happen to work in sports, and I feel really blessed to do that. It's something I've cared about since I was 5 years old, basically, is, any kind of sports statistic. And, I'm 6 foot, like 175. I wasn't really going to have any chance of playing a professional sport. So as soon as that it was like, well, how can I get paid to be at least involved in sports, right? So I mentioned here, there's a lot of different types of jobs, and it's really just sort of what is sort of the best thing, right? So for example, there's impactful jobs, right? Maybe you feel really passionate about climate change, and you want to talk about some of the data with, people's carbon footprints and stuff like that. There's hobbyist jobs, which I would sort of put mine in, right? Where it's like, this is just something I kind of just love to do. And I love fiddling with RBIs or passing yards, and I don't care too much about PE ratios. I also put respected in there, right? Because there's certain times where I would say, especially if you just want to work for a really awesome company that maybe you feel like people really, really like and respect, or just, that maybe, for example, working at one of the tech giants is really just kind of bring some cachet to you and sort of all that you've happened to work for. I would say the career is in its infancy and continuing to grow. And I think that's super true. It seems like every week somebody comes up with an article about, the new job of the 21st century is data science and data analysis. And I think there's certainly some truth to that. And I think, honestly, we're kind of living in a real great example of why data is so powerful, because a lot of the stuff revolving around COVID-19 and what metrics might be the best. And, let's have some of these data points being able to prove why or why not we should open up. And, how we should handle different precautionary things. And I think we're seeing really kind of a study in time of just like how important it is both to be data savvy, but also data literate, right? I'm not a healthcare worker. I'm not anyone, revolving around that industry, but I think it's been incredibly important for me as someone who works with data to be able to read through some of the stuff and be able to say, I'm not sure that you're necessarily using that in the proper way, or maybe I don't love your methods that you're exactly doing. So again, I think it's just super important as we continue to have all of these data-driven jobs, even if you're not necessarily, the back-end person running thousands of lines of code, it's always going to be important to be sort of involved in data. But I do kind of say that you really have to kind of make the right decision for yourself. I think you can really have a job and doing kind of whatever you want to do. But again, not everyone's going to be necessarily motivated by the same things. Maybe you're just like, listen, I just, want to work really hard. I want to make a ton of money. And that's totally reasonable. And you will probably do fairly well in this industry, especially if you sort of continue, and especially if you get to that data science level where you're looking at six figures. And that's a very comfortable life for a lot of people. Other people are maybe just like, I kind of want to have a work-life balance, which also, tech happens to really be good at. In terms of, maybe having casual dress codes and, being able to take a lot of time off and all that stuff. And then, the prestige stuff I mentioned as well. And even just what the company values are. Do you like working at this company? Do you like going to work every day? Do you believe in what they're talking about? And again, being able to continue to freshen up those skills, because the industry is changing all the time. I mean, I learned Tableau on Tableau 8, and they've sort of revised, and now they're on Tableau 2020. And so that's like 7 versions, and things are different than when I started. So it's very important to always stay on top of things, because if you're not, somebody else is. And that's why you always kind of need to keep things fresh and make sure that you're always at the cutting edge. And with that, I hope everyone sort of enjoyed the presentation. I guess I'll open it up now to Eric, and hopefully we have some questions from the audience.
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Abe. I know we had a few technical difficulties in terms of the live stream here, so I apologize for that. We all know how some of these new things and new tools that seem like they're going to be super awesome end up having a little hiccups here and there when they're meshing with some of these older systems. So sorry for that. Again, definitely, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just add them into the comments section on the YouTube, and then we'll get to those. Again, if you want to reach out to Abe individually, he is on LinkedIn, so definitely check him out there if there's something that you want to get more into. And then again, apologize for the technical difficulties on that. And also, we will be sharing this presentation, so you can definitely rewatch this if you missed anything in the deck as well. So don't worry about that too. So yeah, we'll wait for a few minutes and see if we have any questions, and then we'll go from there. So it looks like we do have a question here. Looks like from Fernando, and he was just wondering if you need a degree or a certificate to get into this stuff.
Right. I think that's going to be somewhat dependent on the exact industry, but I would say for sports specifically, and I think I mentioned this in the talk a little bit, but when I mentioned the stuff about sort of a hobbyist job, I think that stuff matters a little bit less when you talk about hobbyists, because typically, if that's something, I think this is especially true in sports, where you'll see people will start really just kind of with a blog, right? There's a lot of public data out there doing a lot of different things. Typically, if that's something, I think this is especially true in sports, where you'll see people will start really just kind of with a blog, right? There's a lot of public data out there doing a lot of different things. Sorry, I think I got some feedback, but I'll wait up here. Anyway, so I think people have situations where there's a lot of public data available, so they can really kind of prove their skills sort of online, really. So it's almost having like a secondary, you might have your resume, but also like, here's my website that I was able to do some of the stuff that you're requiring of me. So I would say it's not required, but I definitely think it helps, especially if you want to get into the upper levels, right? I think it's one thing to sort of prove that you have the ability to program and code. There's a lot of people that can do that, but I think the degrees will really help you if you want to take that next step in terms of, especially, I think it's important to make the difference here between data analyst and data scientist. I'd say data scientist, you really do need to kind of get into your master's and PhDs type of level for the most part. But data analyst jobs, I would say, obviously it's going to help you But I think you can sort of get away with a combination of a certificate and maybe a lot of different things in conjunction with that. Like I mentioned, maybe you have a blog where you're sort of grappling with some of these analysis, or you're, showing different ways to do things like that. Because again, like so many of these programs are open source, right? So if you have sort of a link to a Python or GitHub, type of program that maybe you have done or worked on or something like that, I think that can be an adequate replacement, although it's never going to sort of quite replace. And again, I think that's where it's important to always kind of stay up with the times, because I think, again, more with those hobbyist jobs where things are changing rapidly, right? So with sports, to use my sort of personal example, it seems like there's like a sports analytics book coming out every 3 or 4 months, and you feel really kind of compelled to read it, basically, because you want to really have information on how people are doing it differently. And I think there's always going to be somewhat of a divide between what is sort of readily available in the public and what maybe companies have access to. But that doesn't mean that there's not data that's readily available. I know census data is another example for that you can really kind of play with and get into the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty with, and really do some really interesting stuff. I think that's, again, been another thing with COVID-19, where there's people who are sort of data analysts and data scientists in other fields that are kind of like, well, okay, let's see what I can kind of do with this. And there's certainly dangers to that, but I do think it's more good than bad in terms of really kind of democratizing the entire process. I do think it's more good than bad in terms of really kind of democratizing the entire process.
All right. So we got another question here. Looks like, so people are wondering, it's from a couple of people, Pan and John, both asking Tableau versus Power BI. I think, what are your thoughts on them? And then also, which one do you believe is maybe the best or most popular? I'm sure that it's kind of a back and forth here, but what are your thoughts on those?
Right. I would say Power BI is definitely becoming more popular, right? Tableau sort of had, at least in terms of that comparison, was sort of first to the market in terms of just those two. Obviously, there are a lot of other different ones that people can use. I would say Tableau is a little more popular. I think the good thing with Tableau is that Power BI, you have to have, it's a little harder to practice on, right? So you can have a Tableau public profile. And like I was talking about with that first question, in terms of having sort of a portfolio that you can go to an interview and be able to say like, hey, this is what I've worked on, right? This is maybe similar to what stuff you've talked about in the job description. So you can really just kind of mess around with Tableau public, and sort of, it's not as good as the sort of professional creator version of Tableau, but it's definitely a reasonable facsimile. So I would say, and this is, again, I'm going to come in here with a lot of bias because I sort of started on Tableau. And it seems like to me, I can sort of do a search really of just Tableau jobs, and that will give me a ton of different results. But I do think there is sort of certain momentum for switching to Power BI in terms of market share, just again, because I think especially in, if we're sort of in a recession or kind of coming close to it, companies are looking to kind of cut costs, and it's really attractive to be able to sort of save money from switching to Tableau to Power BI. So again, I wouldn't be shocked if Power BI sort of continue to grab more market share from Tableau. But again, I think it comes down to personal preference. And for me, I just find Tableau to be a little more user-friendly. But I would say it's probably just best to dabble with both and pick whatever one you kind of like with or feel more comfortable with, and just rock it, knock it out, take all the courses. I think Tableau has free online courses for like another 5 days, for example. So it would be a nice sort of use of a weekend to just kind of spend a couple hours messing around with what you can possibly do. Maybe you've taken a course here at Promotable in terms of, and you feel comfortable with that, and kind of just see how you feel about it. And if you happen to like it, then try to be a Tableau rock star. If you find yourself, I'm not buying Tableau, what Tableau's selling, I like Power BI better, become a Power BI rock star. I think the simplest answer is there's going to be jobs for both. So I think it's important to dabble with both, but again, knock one out of the park. There's going to be jobs for both. So I think it's important to dabble with both, but again, knock one out of the park.
Perfect. So the next question we got in here is, I think it's a good question. It's kind of funny too. But Guy just asked, what do you think is the next big thing when it comes to sports data analytics?
I would say the biggest thing that's coming up is, and I think we're seeing this first in baseball, but I think it's going to come to all the different sports as well. Is there was a time when the data was a lot more democratized. There were a lot of hobbyists, frankly, that again were sort of leading the charge, and then the teams, basically, again, if you're not a sports fan, the teams, think of them basically just like companies, and so the teams are almost kind of lagging behind. But now I think as the teams have caught up, obviously the teams have a lot more money to spend in terms of infrastructure and data and hiring people. And that's really, I think, what you're seeing a big sort of advantage between the teams. Again, for those of you who aren't big sports fans, there's a salary cap in a lot of sports in terms of so you basically can pay the players about the same amount of money in each sport. But teams are looking at it and say, well, there's no limit on how much I can spend on an analytics department. So the New York Yankees, who are the richest baseball team, they also have one of the highest payrolls, but they also have, I think, around 30 data analysts and analytics people on their, that are employees of the team. And there are other teams that have 2. And you can only imagine sort of how much of a difference that makes. And I think you're also seeing, again, to use baseball as an example, you see StatCast is sort of reinventing the game. They're basically using cameras to track everything. So that's how fast the runners run, how fast and far the ball goes. I think eventually in baseball specifically, we'll see sort of things with hit pass and how hard people are swinging. And I think right now there's sort of a monopoly where the teams are really learning, like, hey, we can get in bed with Amazon and Google and whomever else, and really we can take control of this data, and we will only let the public see what we want the public to see. So I think you're seeing a quick 180 where there was a while, maybe 10 years from 2000 to 2010, 2015 range, where the public was kind of in lockstep with the teams, and at some points even past it. And I think now the teams are just so far ahead, they just have so much more data. And I think, again, if any sports fans are here, a big part of the sports industry is sort of fans like myself and whomever else, writing articles and, industry things about, oh, this team is making dumb decisions. They're basically they have bad players for this X, Y, and Z reason. I think we're kind of quickly learning that even the teams that are considered sort of behind the curve are actually way ahead of where we are in the public space. And they might have a really good reason for making a decision that, again, we just are not privy to. We don't have that data. So I would say that's going to be the biggest thing, is just where that sort of power struggle between team and public goes. And I would say, again, the teams, I think, have incentives to kind of maintain their advantage on the public, and they keep hiring the best public analysts. So I don't know. I don't see that gap narrowing anytime soon.
All right, awesome. And so we just got one last question here before we wrap up. And I think what Jose is trying to say is, he said, how do you get experience and best practices? But what I think he's trying to say is, like, what other ways besides just having experience to get these best practices? Is there any kind of avenues, whether it's like books or websites or anything like that, that can help get better practices in terms of analytics in your realm?
Right. Again, I think it really kind of can depend on the industry. I'm with you a little bit, Jose. I remember when I kind of was first starting for jobs, right? And the classic, needs 5 years of experience for an introductory level job, right? And it can be very frustrating, and I felt that myself at oftentimes. I would say, again, depending on what your sort of interest is and what you sort of see your future looking like. Again, simple events like this can be really helpful, I think, in terms of like really refining how well that works. But again, I think building your own portfolio is super helpful. And I think, frankly, it's not that difficult. Even just having a fairly rudimentary website, they still look real awesome these days. Even just like a company like Wix, for example, I never used them, not endorsed by them or anything, but just to use one example, like super easy to make a really decent looking website and really just kind of struggle through things yourself, because there's oftentimes, I think, and again, we're finding this today, where we have so much data that we spend so much time cleaning the data and not nearly enough time analyzing the data. And I think that can be a really powerful skill to be able to have in terms of being able to do both, even if that's not what you're looking to be able to do. I think, it's having an understanding and appreciation of how that gets done, I think, can be really helpful as well. But again, I think the portfolio or a website or something similar to that, even if, again, it's maybe you want to work in finance, but it's like, hey, I'm a really big sports fan. Start playing around with some sports data for a while, post it up on website, put it on LinkedIn and Twitter, and kind of see what happens, see if you get some engagement with it, and see if you kind of frankly like it. I think a lot of times part of the problem with data analysis and data science is people get into it because they're reading some of these articles of like, oh, this is, the sexiest job of 2020 or whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, there's a lot of kind of grunt work involved, right? So I think it's important to sort of experiment a little bit, right? I think it is one thing to kind of take some classes, even if it's at the graduate level, and say like, oh, I kind of like this. I dig doing these exercises. Maybe you're, taking programs like Promotable, et cetera. But do you actually like doing it? And that can be really helpful. It's like, let me try to mold a passion with data. And if you do happen to like that, maybe that's kind of your way of gaining experience, so you can be into an interview and say, listen, I don't have experience, but what I do have is I have some dashboards that I've built in Tableau, or here are some things that I used. I built my own SQL database based on census data or baseball data or whatever your environmental data, whatever you happen to be passionate about. And that's where I think passion projects, even if that doesn't become your career, it certainly can help your career.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Abe. I really appreciate you coming out and doing this. Again, for everyone else, apologies for the technical difficulties. Again, we'll be having this on our YouTube as well as on all of our social media stuff. So definitely check it out there if you missed anything. And again, thanks very much for coming and supporting Promotable and all of our events. And like and subscribe our YouTube page, and again, all of our social media, and keep in the loop for all of our upcoming events and classes. So thanks again, Abe. I appreciate you, spending the time with us and taking all the time out of your day to talk about data. So thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure.